Today we're going to take a closer look at the new 2023 Honda Super Cub 125, a little bike with a lot of history behind it, as Honda has sold over 100 million of these across 160 different countries, making it the most sold motor vehicle of all time. So, needless to say, these things are pretty hot, and that's why you'll want to stick around to learn more about Honda's best-selling motorcycle as we go over everything you need to know, from what changed this year to details on the drivetrain, electronics, and more when it comes to this legendary platform. First up, we'll start with options, or should I say lack thereof. Now, we don't get the smaller Super Cub 50 or 110 here in the States, so surely we have some color options, right? Nope. We only get one color, unlike other corners of the world, and it's called Pearl Gray. And let me say, video does not do this paint justice, as it changes drastically depending on the lighting, and the pearl in it really pops when the light hits it just right. But what do you guys think though? Do you prefer this new color scheme over last year's matte gray metallic? Next up, let's get into the chassis and suspension. It's sporting a tubular steel backbone style frame, and Honda went to great lengths to fine-tune this bike's chassis and make it ride as smooth as possible. And to help minimize some of those vibrations, you've got a rubber mounted handlebar and seat with rubber inserts for the foot pegs as well. Sadly, no passenger pegs and seat for us here in the USA, like other corners of the world, but we'll get more into that shortly. When it comes to seat heights, even though it shares a frame with the CT125, but with some minor differences, it comes in slightly lower at 30.7 inches, so you don't have to be a giant to feel comfortable, and its 238-pound curb weight helps a lot with not being intimidated when throwing a leg over it. And while it may not be the lightest in Honda's miniMOTO and scooter model lineup, it's not far from it. Now for suspension, up front you've got a teeny tiny 26mm fork hidden behind the bodywork to help clean things up a bit, and yes, they're not adjustable, but that's par for the course on these bikes. They bring in 3.5 inches of suspension travel, and out back you've got a twin shock setup that are color matched, which really add a nice touch while bringing in 3.3 inches of travel. And last year they changed up the springs and bump stops for a smoother ride, so if you rode the first gen and didn't care for its ride quality, it might be time to give it another try. And yes, they're not adjustable either, helping the suspension do its thing and roll over those bumps a little easier when compared to the tiny wheels on Honda's other smaller bikes, or a set of large and absolutely beautiful 17-inch aluminum wheels. This super narrow wheel setup is made using a special cutting process to enable the use of a tubeless tire with a 70x90 up front and a slightly wider 80x90 in the rear. And the icing on the cake, you can pick up a set of those tires for around $100, which is hard to beat. And up front you have Honda's ABS, anti-lock braking system, to help keep you from locking that front tire up in less than ideal conditions, with a single 2-piston caliper biting down on a 220mm disc. And in the rear we head back to the 19th century for a 110mm drum brake instead of a disc brake setup like its brother, the CT125. Now let's move over to the engine and drivetrain. The Super Cub has an air-cooled 2-valve single overhead cam, single-cylinder 124cc engine, a platform that's very similar to what's used in the Monkey, Grom, Dax, and CT, albeit with slightly different configurations, and I don't want to bore you guys to sleep. Wake up. In this video, faster than I already have with explaining all of their differences, but this package has been practically indestructible for the most part, just like with the original Cub. And this engine setup helps the Super Cub come in at 9.7 horsepower and a ground-shattering 7.7 foot-pounds of torque that'll help propel you to a top speed of right around the 60 mile per hour mark. Give or take, as with these little bikes, it's all about how much weight it's hauling around, and of course elevation changes come into play too. It's fuel injected, and American Honda does not advertise its fuel economy rating, but Japan does. And if we take that 156 mile per gallon rating, pair it up with its 1-gallon fuel tank, and throw some difficult math equations in there, it puts your range at about 150 miles before you're pushing it. And just like the Dax and Trail 125, you don't have to worry about using a clutch to ride the Super Cub, as it does not have a manual transmission with a clutch, but instead it has a semi-automatic setup, so there's less likelihood of you doing this. If you're new to riding, it doesn't get any easier, with neutral being at the bottom, and then click up and down through your 4-speed transmission with its heel toe shifter as you let off the throttle between shifts. and the gear position indicator makes life even easier for you. And when it comes to maintaining this drivetrain package, you don't have to worry about breaking the bank, as there's not much to it, as you can see here in the maintenance schedule. Now let's bounce around the bike and touch on a few different things. Storage. Do you have any? Well, yes and no. Technically, you've got this little side compartment that holds your toolkit. Wait, it has a toolkit? Yep, a screwdriver and an Allen wrench.
Wow.
But back on topic, you won't be storing much in this little cubby hole, but thankfully you do have cargo rack options for the rear, so you can mount a trunk and so on. Which leads us over to accessories, and if you like to modify things and or just want to make it more friendly for the kind of riding you'll be doing, the accessory and aftermarket parts world for the Super Cub is on another level, and I'll have some options linked below for you guys to check out. Now, how about electronics? Well, you don't have a million different rider modes to choose from and complicate things to where you can't just hit the start button and go, but Honda did decide to throw some new tech at this bike that's not on all of the other mini bikes, and that's a smart key. I could take 10 minutes explaining how it works, and personally, I prefer a dumb key, but it works, and a lot of people love how you can simply keep the key fob in your pocket, turn the ignition knob, hit the start button, and you're good to go. With the lock function being just as easy to use to help slow someone down that wants to get their hands on it. And when it comes to gauges, it has a super simple setup with only one button to cycle through your readouts. Plus you also get LED lighting all around the bike, which really adds a nice touch to it. And sadly, we're still stuck with the Grom tail it out back instead of what other corners of the world get that also include better looking turn signals. But which light setup do you guys think looks better? Next up, let's start it up real quick and show you what she sounds like, and then we'll come back and talk about what Honda changed for this year and more. Now, what did Honda change for this year on the Super Cub 125? The only changes come in the way of colors and pricing, with Honda bumping its MSRP up $50 to $38.49 for this year. And I'm curious, what do you guys think they should have changed to bring this bike to the next level? And not that you ask, but here's some changes I'd like to see. I'd like to see Honda throw a side stand on the Super Cub. Yes, these bikes are super easy to put on the center stand, but it's so much easier for most people to have a normal kickstand when you just want to hop on and off quickly. I'd also like to see Honda throw a larger fuel tank on this thing, as it's got the smallest tank out of all the 125 models. Now, I'm not talking about a 5-gallon tank on this little guy, but an extra half-gallon would do wonders for its range. And
another one
is the passenger seat, or should I say lack thereof. I know most of you aren't worried about toting a passenger around on your 125, but there are a lot of people that would like to see them come standard. I do have to say though, I think it looks better without it, but what are your thoughts on it? Now, I could ramble on a lot more about things I'd like to see them change, like throwing a 4-valve head on it, and maybe the engine from the PCX 160 that pumps out almost 16 horsepower, but I'm curious about what you guys think, and Honda does pay attention to these videos, so let your voices be heard down in the comments section, and let's talk about it all. And on that note, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one, but first,